Welcome to All Things LOCS, where today we're going to be discussing everything related to revenue cycle management. I know, the most exciting aspect of your business, but truthfully, it's one of the most crucial points of a healthcare organization that surprisingly gets very overlooked. So that's why today we're talking to Moshe Teich, and he's going to be discussing how to not just create the systems that are going to enable you to capture more revenue, reduce your stress, reduce how many hours you're putting in every week just to your medical billing team, but he's going to be discussing how you can actually implement a software that he is launching to help you with the most, difficult part of dealing with insurance, which is insurance denials. So as much as we're all stressing about how to get reimbursed more, how to reduce our denials, how to make more revenue without increasing our burnout, this is going to be an episode for you for something that is critical but vastly overlooked. I'll see you there. Moshe, welcome to the show, man. Glad you made it. Obviously, you're dealing with some nice 13 to 18 inches of snow in New Jersey, so glad we're hanging out in Vegas, but we made this work. Really just want to get us started. If you could just give the audience a little bit of a breakdown of yourself, just your history in the billing and revenue cycle world. So maybe let's just start there first.
Sure. Hey, thanks for having me. So some people call me Moshe. They have a hard time reading Moshe off the page easily, so you can call me either one. I'll respond. I've also been called Moesha before, so as long as you don't do that,
We should go there. Like, we got Moquisha up on here.
yeah.
Mosh, perfect.
Yeah. So I've been doing revenue cycle in various different pieces within the healthcare industry. I had started off doing hospital revenue cycle, both in and outpatient for teaching hospitals in New York City. Started on their inpatient side at a consulting company, and then getting hired directly at a hospital to do it for outpatient, which led me to root cause analysis, trying to figure out where would go wrong to start with, rather than figuring it out at the end just to get paid. Did that for about 10 or 12 years. I then was recruited away to a home care platform, so post-acute care for people that are either elderly or those that are disabled or maybe a discharge from hospitals, and then they're getting care in the home rather than being in a nursing facility or assisted living. So transitioned some of the knowledge that I had of analysis and root cause to over to the home care side, helped some of those platforms build out their payer model, which includes a lot of revenue cycle or billing as it relates to authorizations and claims and different kinds of units related to home care. And throughout, the consistent focus that I've always had is being able to build systems or efficiencies that allow care providers to be focusing on care rather than on the system that they're using and how much paperwork they have to do, and try to find those efficiencies. Because, what I have found is, when you point out those items to the providers, they get it, but that's not what their focus is. So if you can remove that from them needing to think about it all day, that's like the streamline that has been through the various industries that I've touched through revenue cycle.
What would you say is starting in a hospital? How did that help you, or maybe give you some clarity on some things that you just maybe didn't know at that point?
So I think that there are a lot of competing priorities at a hospital, right? And depending on which department you are, how do you get the most attention to get some projects approved, or some focus that's going your way. So I think being able to use data and analysis to show or be able to prove out your KPIs or what might be missing, so that you can then say, hey, if we invest in this project, here's some low-hanging fruit we'll be able to find as part of an ROI. That really was something that I had to learn there. When I was at the consulting company prior, all of our business was hospitals. There was nothing really to learn. But once I moved over to the hospital side, understanding that you need to fight for your right, to get funded, that was really something that helped me learn how to properly focus that attention.
You were saying, and I appreciate what you're saying there, but about creating the systems for the providers so they don't have to essentially get bogged down with that aspect itself. When you're moving a little bit into a different space, which you're going to dive plenty into, but for, independent practice owners, then the space that you're going to, how many of them are actually still trying to function as maybe the owner, the treating provider, and doing the billing at the same time? Like, what would you say is the percentage that you've come across?
So I don't know if I have a specific percentage. I'd say too many, right, are trying to do all of it rather than to bring in people that could help them. Um, I think if I had to guess on that, I'd say there's probably about 40% are doing some outsourcing, and maybe 60% are keeping that in house. Those are just rough numbers from my experience.
Yeah. I want to. You said something just a second ago where it was fighting for your right to get funded inside of the hospital setting, and to me, that's really interesting because boiling it down, all it says is like, hey, there's a limited amount of resources, and you have multiple departments and different groups within that company that need to get access to those resources. And you know what it reminds me of? It kind of reminds me of racing, like Formula One. Like there's only so much resources that, let's just say, Red Bull Racing, Ferrari, they have, and it's like the powertrain department, the chassis department, the aero department, right? They're trying to, like, we need this first, and it can cause actually friction inside of the teams, and it could impact the overall performance of the car and the winning. Do you find that it's like similar in that sense? Is like, you're trying to fight for funding for this thing, but then someone across the table can have a equally, compelling argument that they need that funding for something else for patient outcomes. And does that
Oh,
create anything? Yeah, tell us a little bit about that. That's very interesting to me.
it definitely gets dicey for sure, right? You have or just going along with that example, if you were taking like let's say provider contracting, they might decide that, well, we also can attack the same problem of this revenue that we have to make up by maybe negotiating better contracts. So if we use the money to fund to bring in an actuary, we'd be able to find out who we should be contracting with better, and therefore we'll find savings that way. And my argument though is like within the contracts that we have, if we followed all the rules, we can get paid better by just keeping to our own SLAs rather than needing to go out there. So I'm not saying we can't negotiate better rates, but how about within
Mhm.
what we have, we make that better? And I guess the argument that I would say, maybe selfishly, is if you don't fix what I'm recommending that we do now, you get those better rates from those other vendors. But if you don't know how to follow up with that and to get paid correctly, because you haven't fixed that to start with, you'll have the same problem with the new vendors that you bring in. So while I think many departments would have a leg to stand on, if you don't fix your systems, if you don't fix your process, bringing in new vendors is a temporary band-aid.
That's interesting.
What when you're working with people, I think I need you to correct me here. I feel as if billing and what you just described is very overlooked, even though it's one of the most critical components to running a successful business in healthcare. Am I just interpreting that the wrong way, or is that something that you actually encounter as well? And if so, why is that?
No, you're 100% right. I think that billing is looked at as like an afterthought because they're in the business of caring, whether you're at the hospital or private practice. The main goal is to care for patients. So all systems are built around making sure you're the most efficient while you're doing that care, or at least their attempt to get that done. The billing is the outcome of everything else that led up to that point. So that's after the scheduling, it's after the contract negotiation, it's after the service actually happened, then billing happens. So within the hospital systems, the EMRs that are there have also built out revenue cycle modules because it was important enough for them to build something that people can use to collect that. But once you're outside of the hospital market and you're talking about post-acute care, most of the systems that are built are either the same EMRs or they're EMR light. They never really built out their billing side of it from a productivity standpoint. Sure, you can track whether you got paid, you can see if you got denied, but all the work that needs to happen between denial and payment, they haven't really built anything out. Whereas if you're talking about scheduling, there might be 5 or 6 different scheduling features that help somebody get from I have a patient and I have a doctor and I need to find them the right time to meet each other. That's needed in order to even get reimbursement owed. But actually following up in the reimbursement once you've completed those services, many systems have left out the productivity tracking that might be needed to collect.
When you're everybody thinks I think there's two misconceptions is that number one, anything that you get denied is automatically a direct result of insurance just being crap, right? It's just they're out to get us, so they're going to deny us and everything, and then it doesn't create a process by which you actually do some investigation. Um, I'd actually maybe we'll just touch on that first. You're saying you're doing a root cause analysis. Is that what you're essentially looking into? Is just like, all right, what are we actually getting denied for, and what can we do to correct it as best we can?
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, remind me to tell you an analogy in about a minute, but just to give you a quick story from my time at the hospitals, right? Um, Looking at that root cause analysis, what we ended up doing was I would go down to the OR scheduling office to find out what they were doing, because somehow half of the OR scheduling would get denied for no insurance, right? Or not eligible for that service. And how do we get to the day of surgery and nobody's figured that out yet, right? So I went down to go look. And the people that were working there had started their day. They would not start scheduling the next day's surgery until after 2 p.m. So trying to figure out why, they said, well, we have to wait for the woman from the ER to push this push cart full of papers across the street to give us those patients to enter for admits. So I said, well, what EMR are you using? And they named the EMR. And I said, well, what does the ER use? Well, they use the same one. So then why are we waiting for a printout? And it turns out that 75 years ago, when that hospital was founded, right, the ER person sat in front of the OR person and they would pass slips back and forth. And that just evolved to people now pushing carts full of paper. Even though they're in the same EMR, nobody's changed their process, right?
So frustrating.
Right, and nobody went to look and investigate it, because if RCM just did fixing the denial piece and you didn't look at what's wrong with the process, you've saved 4 hours in a day now, where if they can start their day at 9 a.m., they just need to look in a different part of the EMR to get that done. Revenue cycle doesn't have to worry about all those people that had surgery without verifying insurance. So, you know yeah, go ahead.
Let me ask you, like, how rampant is this? Like, is this just like when you hear about stuff like this, is this like, hey man, this is like a rare thing in healthcare, or if I were to put you, Moshe, in like 100 different hospital settings, clinics, would you be like, no, this is very consistent in a lot of places?
It's very maybe not that specific bad workflow, but it's very consistent in a lot of places. If you have some there's almost an advantage to being new. If you're a new provider, you don't know about all the old stuff people used to do. But if you're a facility
Yeah.
that's been around 50 plus years, I'd say it's very rampant and probably very relevant to a lot of different systems. 50 years and older, they're probably doing something that they've converted paper to electronics without thinking about how to do it.
Yeah, I would imagine establishments like that that have been around for 50 plus years in a market where there's trust there, everybody knows it. It's a landmark place where people go, and yet they're still running their operations just in a way that is completely counterproductive.
100%. I mean, one of the things that made me create the product that we're going to talk about, right, was really I had worked at a company that was billing $4 billion a year and managing the outcomes on spreadsheets. So there's no system with our tracking productivity, right? Now they were doing a
Yeah.
pretty good job, they think, right, of collecting
Yeah.
that, but they have a team of 25 people, multiple spreadsheets, who has the latest version, trying to use SharePoint to get some sort of shared Excel use. But
Mhm.
I mean, what I found also is that most of the systems that were put into place, because it was just an afterthought, they're not building in that tracking productivity to get that done. So a lot of what happens in healthcare, and differently than many other industries, when systems came in to innovate, healthcare systems had to first make sure they were following regulation. And then because regulations change year over year, every time Medicaid makes a change or CMS makes a change, those systems need to adapt. And like any other program, you have your developers who need to put it into sprints and spend some time
Mhm.
working it. Then they UAT it, then they put it out to production. Much of what they built and then iterated on has to do with regulations that change every year. So there hasn't been like an innovative EMR
Uh,
feature, if you will, is literally just digitizing the paper process and then following regulation.
so it could so you're having these healthcare facilities that are kind of riding that knife's edge of like, look, let's either we update some things and then now we're beholden to the to be in compliance with this new legislation, this new regulation, or maybe just stick to something that, it's kind of on the slower side, like pretty slow. It's old school. It's not very effective, but at least we know it. At least we're not going to have the rug pulled out from underneath us and we have to throw more resources at it to update, update, update. Is that kind of the mindset, would you say, or is it just people have no appreciation towards these updates?
Well, I mean, having been on the product management side of some of these platforms, when you're looking at to create your roadmap about what takes priority, regulation and compliance always has to come first because without that, the facilities can't operate. So you have to first deal with regulation and then you're able to do that. So if you have a very large product team, then you can have some people on compliance and regulation and some people on innovation. But if you were looking to even keep your company lean, you would likely not have enough people to do both all the time.
Mm. And Moshe, you said a second ago to remind you about an analogy.
Yeah. So I've worked both on the payer side and I've worked on the provider side and the platform side in post acute. So it's given me like a unique angle or view on how I look at it. And it's kind of like playing the game of life, right? And similar to almost, and not to get political at all, but to talk about the way taxes are, right? If you learn the right regulations and the way the I don't even want to call them loopholes, but the way that the law allows you to file your taxes or the way that you need to get paid, if you play within the rules, I'm not talking about rule breakers, you can learn how not to have to pay certain taxes by accomplishing certain things that allow you to take those tax breaks, right? All legal, right? And I look at billing and revenue cycle the same way. There's a game that has to be played because there are people who defraud, right? So in order to keep everybody safe and to make sure patients get the care that they need, you just have to play the game right. So it isn't complicated, but you do have to follow some rules. And part of, revenue cycle or root cause analysis just says, hey, it's probably best
Yeah.
practice that before you do anything, check eligibility, right? Or check eligibility every week. So, to Dan's earlier question, there isn't like if things are getting denied, it's because the insurance companies are just trying to give you a hard time. I mean, that could happen in extreme cases, but overall, if you follow the rules or you know how to fix it, you can get paid the right way every time, 100% of the time. But if that's not yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, no, go ahead, finish that thought.
I was gonna say, if that's not your area of expertise, that's going back to what I said before. I wouldn't want a doctor to need to be the expert on that, right? A doctor shouldn't have to figure that out. So either that's why they're either going outsourcing or like the tool that I built, they'd be able to keep that in house.
Yeah, so, you mentioned something that was to me, it's a mindset, right? So, and you use the IRS, and the way that you positioned it, it's like, we wanna do things ethically, morally within the guidelines, and I think, you know, when people look at kind of like tax code, it's like, well, these are write-offs because the government actually wants you to do this. It wants you to invest into real estate. It wants you to put money into these places because it just stimulates those specific industries. And then you get write-offs for that. And it's like, so if you can navigate through that intelligently, that's actually really, really wise. But kind of what you mentioned a second ago, it's like there's a mindset of like, oh, I need to, I can't. And you're saying in healthcare, we need to shift that mindset of like, look, this is just a game. And there's the insurance game, the healthcare game, how they and where they come together, where you just need to look at it from a very different perspective. That's kind of what I'm getting from you is like if people
What?
switched away from the older way of thinking of I have to it's black and white, you're saying like, no, there's some gray area there that you can push that's legal in order for your company to have those consistent reimbursements and making sure everything is more it's just what's that word? Like it's uh you know what I'm saying, right? Like yeah, it's
Yeah.
easier.
I mean, differently than my area of expertise. So I'll just have like one line on this, and then that's beyond what I would know, right? But there's a lot of people that look at DRGs in an inpatient setting. So if you code
What's
up
a
an
for our audience, DRG, what's that stand for?
So I don't remember what it stands for, but what it is a grouping of how you should reimburse this account. So if somebody comes in for, I don't know, let's say a liver transplant, you'd want the DRG to reflect a liver transplant, even though 1,000 other things happened. So let's say you gave him a blood transfusion, and let's say you gave him oxygen, you gave him anesthesia. You want to roll that up to a DRG, which codes it in the most expensive way that you can get reimbursed for the work that you did, right? And I can't remember the name of, what there are companies that do is they will review your lists of surgeries or inpatient stays and say, hey, if we code this differently, you can get paid. And this is not making up stuff that didn't happen. It's like you've decided to reimburse everything at a blood transfusion, but if you would have done it at a liver transplant, the reimbursement's higher. So there's definitely ways to play within without defrauding anything, just using the rules that are built there to get paid better by following the rules that they set.
I love that you said that. What's when we're looking at the grand scheme of medical billing and RCM, and you just that outline what you just put out there is phenomenal. But what do you say is the most maybe common misconception that just organizations get wrong when it comes to their billing and the RCM process?
That you need to have experts in order to fix it. Right. I don't, what I think they don't know is when you sign a contract with a payer, that payer needs to let you know all their rules about what they will reimburse for and what not. And maybe back in the day, it was harder for somebody to review a 200 page contract to like figure out what their operations should be. There's AI right now that you can feed the document to say, hey, give me my rules that are in my contract right now so that I know how to set up a structure, right? So even basic chat GPT prompts should be able to help you do that. But also, I mean, something like what I've built is really the denials that you're going to receive are not surprises, right? There's a finite list of what denials are. There's a finite list of how to fix those to get those done. So if you're able to work that process properly, you don't need to be an expert. You just need to do the same repeatable actions to make sure that you're doing what you need to get paid.
That must be so kind of comforting to a lot of like, doctors where you're saying like there are no surprises. Because on the flip side of it is, with who Dan and I have worked with is like there are a lot of surprises. They're like shocked. They're like, oh my God, this didn't go through, this didn't go through. And it's but having that kind of no surprises, it's like, okay, this has a probability of maybe coming back. This one is a sure thing that's gonna go through. What does that do, would you say, to just maybe the overall not mindset, but like the mental health care of the people that are running these facilities?
I mean, I think that those that have been able to put in systems in place that get this done, I mean, it allows them to go home at night, right? Where you have people that work in the whole day, right? And then
Yeah.
they spend the rest of the time trying to figure out the right paperwork that needs to be filled out to submit when you could have a very strict rule set of what you needed to do and maybe would have collected along the way rather than spending your nighttime trying to bill what you did during the day.
So it's basically, we talk about, and you hear this so much in healthcare, especially like any other business, but what's the cost or what's the return on investment, right? And then they don't always factor in, we just outline in there is, are you spending maybe X amount of hours extra every day? Or, even the cost of rework, like having to resubmit claims and whatnot. So, I mean, and that I feel is one of the bigger challenges for maybe some of the smaller practices that we encounter, which is I just don't have time to. Number one, they don't even know why they're getting denied, but then so they're being very reactive. So to your point, they shouldn't be surprised, but a lot of them are. It's like, I can't believe this got denied, and then you review it, and it makes sense. But then they're saying, well, I don't have 45 minutes to get on the phone and actually try to speak to somebody and appeal this, so I'm just gonna I'll write it off. Like I'll just eat it, I'll write it off. And I was just talking to somebody about this the other day of considering it under billing, so to speak. So maybe you can speak to that a little bit. Like, what's the actual maybe, let's say detriment, but I'm gonna use that word, the detriment to an organization to just say, you know what, we'll take all these things that are either reimbursed wrong. Maybe we got reimbursed 50% of what we should have gotten paid, or we didn't even get paid at all, but it's not even worth our effort. Let's just write it off and just move on and keep going about our day.
Yeah, so I mean, there's got to be some threshold where it still makes sense. Like, if it's a $5, right, and it's costing you $10 to look at it, let's write that off because it's costing you more than that, the threshold of what's left over. But overall, I mean, if you're trying to predict how well you're going to do in the year, so if you're looking at any analytics and whether you have investors into your practice or whether it's even for yourself, you're making your projections based on assuming you're getting paid in full for everything. So if now you start writing off things because you're not sure how to handle the denials or you don't think it's worth the time, well, maybe on one specific example, but if that's your general policy, you'll never reach your projections to profitability for the year because you've written off at under expectations of what you would have thought you were collecting in the beginning. So I mean, I think overall it's just not a good policy because you're not going to be able to hit your numbers that way.
What does that actually, does that communicate anything to the insurance companies if that becomes your habit? And
So I don't think the insurance companies have a particular hit list to say these guys never follow up. Let's just make that happen for them. However, because they are very precise on what you're submitting, they're happy to pay you if you submitted that exception onto why that's different. So it's not like they're, I know there's a concept that they're looking to deny, they're looking not to pay. Well, if you're sticking by the rules, they're going to pay you. Having been on both sides of it, I mean, like I said, it's like playing that game. So just fixing what might not have been there, forgetting to put a nurse's NPI on a bill, right? Now, it might take you a long time to research that, but if you had a system in place that just said add nurse's NPI and resubmit, I mean, that could take you 5 minutes if you knew that's all that was missing. And the insurance company just wanted to know which practitioner was the one that did the work. So I really am not of the mindset that they're out to get you rather than, hey, just make sure you're submitting the right paperwork and you get paid every time.
No, I'm looking at it actually more so if you're not resubmitting and going after what's owed to you. You're almost, I kind of feel as if you're almost telling insurance, hey, I'm willing to accept whatever the hell you give me because I'm not going to take the time to actually appeal this. I think it's more on that angle. Is that you're actually training them to start to deny you versus, all right, if you just took the time, we'd actually pay you for it.
So I don't think, and I've yet to meet the payers that would have built that into their denial process. However, that would go into contracting. So when they're going to originally contract with you, if they realize that you're not following up, they might put some clauses into your contract that will either reimburse you at a lower rate or decide that you have to have, I don't know, a 90% first pass claim result, or they're not going to pay at all. So they might create your contract differently. I don't know about on the backside of denial. I don't think they would have set it up that way. But they'll learn from your habits for your contract.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you had one.
Well, I was gonna say, like, when we're going through the denial process, where are you typically finding the most, the biggest cause of these denials? Like I just feel as if a lot of people don't even know that there is an actual step-by-step process you have to take to get paid. Where do you find when you're going into an organization that, all right, this is the part for you, it's your front desk or it's your coding or it's your notes? Like what pops up the most for you?
Almost always front desk intake, almost always is missing a lot of items. I mean, that's the first step, whether it's getting the person's insurance ID, whether it's making sure that they are covered for those services. Um, Usually those kinds of things are front desk. I'd say the one other thing that happens outside the front desk also is not knowing how to put your services together on a claim to go out the door. And what I mean by that, let's just say you did multiple things for that patient. If you don't bundle them together, you'll get denied. If you have a second claim on the same day saying duplicate service, they won't even look at why you submitted two claims on the same day. So there are ways to get around that, and I don't want to get too technical, but you can use modifiers and there's other ways to get that done. But I'd say outside of the front desk, it's not knowing how to bundle your services together on the claim correctly to get paid.
And just kind of writing on that on the front desk side, because to me it can kind of fall under like a couple of different things. What do you believe is the reason why you know, like that's the culprit. Like that's the area where, hey, if you tightened up on the front desk, whether it's like training and scripting, do you feel like it's just hiring better? What do you feel like people can do to make sure that that area is bulletproof so the rest of the systems can actually take root and basically get that money?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's changing the overall intake process to make certain things required in their system that they're entering that data rather than allowing it to be looser. So it's easier to be looser because if you have members of different kinds of insurance and no insurance at all, you don't want to make certain fields required because if you can't fill that out and then intake can't go on to the next page, then they get frustrated at that system. But really, just need to be smarter about it. If you built tighter system rules around what fields need to be done and you make sure they can't go to the next page without collecting that, I think it's definitely a good way to go. So being able to build in some variability that then triggers requirements probably really help people out a lot.
Are you actually, so you would say then, when an organization is trying to either improve their process or maybe you mentioned that, beginning practice that's just starting out, would you say it's very important then for that to actually build out, all right, here's the process for the front desk as it relates to our RCM to make sure that the first step isn't contributing to us getting denied all the way at the end?
100%. Because what I've seen is some organizations then end up having RCM own many of the front end functions when it's not truly RCM. So because they might have been getting so many denials for eligibility, now RCM is owning eligibility. And then because they're getting so many problems of the way that things are scheduled and overlapping, now RCM owns scheduling. So you don't want that to happen, right? They're supposed to be able to RCM in a clean practice really should be going just cleaning up denials and putting them out there and then letting you know what root cause might be happening on the front end. Once you have RCM owning the front end, you're just in a vicious cycle that'll never get better.
Oof, man. Okay. So now, I want to spend a little time on, I think, is a common question of, do you outsource everything we just talked about or build it in house? Curious to know, and I know it's a hybrid version as well, but I'm curious to know what you think, may work for a certain organization depending on its size. But what are your thoughts overall about just either outsourcing billing altogether or keeping it in house?
So I'm kind of torn on that, right? Because there's good and bad to both sides. I mean, I think outsourcing from a headache or a health standpoint, I know you guys focus a lot on burnout. So I think that there's some very good upside to the outsourcing. If you find a reliable outsourcing company, you just don't need to think about it because they are tracking the rest. I do think that it comes with some detriments, right? Where one, you're pushing your data out to a third party that might not be as secure, or you might not know how secure they need to be. So I think there's a downside there. Also, often that gets outsourced to offshore teams that might be in a different time zone. So them being able to touch base with them at the right times, it could be a little bit of a problem, and sometimes a language barrier. But I think overall, for a provider that has no staff and that needs to that ease of mind, that outsourcing could work. Then again, it also comes with an expense to it, right? You could be paying 10 to 20% of all collections. So whatever your projections were, again, from that, we talked about before, you have to then remove 10 or 20% of that because that outsourcing company is taking that as reimbursement. I'd say that in-house, I think that if you find the right people, at least with the current systems today, I think that could be a good source. They come with the added expense of also needing to have all of their HR capabilities available and their 401k and those other costs. But overall, they can really help you save a lot. And that's where really you can come into those thresholds of let's not go after reimbursements that are under a certain amount because I'm paying you more than what it costs to get that reimbursement.
Yeah.
Uh,
So what one thing that you were mentioning is like finding the right person. And so one of the struggles I've noticed with entrepreneurs, just generally speaking, is that they're kind of wearing a lot of hats, and then when it's time for them to offload a particular thing, so whether they're getting like a CTO, like a chief technical officer, hell, even getting like an accountant, or like a CFO, a CMO, that there's a certain level of appreciation of what I'm hiring for and how that needs to be maybe potentially different than me. And so if someone is watching this and they're like, hey, I do need to hire someone that's kind of wired like Moshe, or someone that has that skill set, someone that has that kind of mental inclination, what do they need to look for so they're not hiring maybe the wrong person, you know?
Yeah, no, I think especially in this specific field is really hard. I think what you really want to look for is who your friends are using, right? It's almost that the personality themselves are coming off of an interview. It's very hard to tell whether that person actually knows what they're doing or not until you see them in practice. So really, I think in this case, the recommendations of other colleagues that have used somebody before that either has capacity or maybe is leaving for another reason, that's really the only reliable way to find somebody new. I mean, you could find some, diamonds in the rough or some gems with somebody that has 20 years of experience, but then you also don't know if you're banking in those bad habits. I really think it comes off recommendation.
So Dan and I, we just did a podcast the other day when we were talking about how in some industries and or even in departments, like I'll just use sales as an example, where you're bringing someone in to be like a sales manager, director of sales, or whatever, specifically in there. And on the in that interview process, you can put their feet to the fire and be like, all right, like here's a script. Let's do a bit of a walkthrough. Let's actually test them, see your tone, see if you're actually good, and see if your resume matches the skills that's in front of me. Uh, Now, for that is very common in that space. But if you were on the other side of the interview table and someone was coming in and to interview for something, like what are some things that you would ask them right off the bat so that you could tell, like, let's just say your client who's that doctor that's going to hire them, like, hey, they know what the hell they're talking about. These are things that we can ask them to make sure, like, all right, let's move them on to the next phase.
It's a good question. I definitely think it's about asking them how they would recommend KPIs or what they would recommend to catch when they're looking to find low-hanging fruit for a practice that needs help. So, what would be the first 5 things you would try to implement in order to help this practice out? That's bleeding this revenue. What are your top 5 favorite denial reason codes that you like to work at that is an easy fix to help revenue start coming back in the door to get that done. I'd really see how they would react to that, that they should know they have a target of like, get your top 5, figuring out how to get that done, put a workflow in place, and then you can start working the harder to get to. But at least your low hanging fruit, they should know off the bat, here's my top 5 that I get, maximum reimbursement for that are also common problems for practices.
And if they stutter, if they're nervous on that, you already know, like, on to the next. This person doesn't know what the hell they're talking about.
Yes. And they don't necessarily have to be good people persons,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or people, right? They don't necessarily need to, because a lot of those people, to be quite honest, are not usually good client facing because they are very analytical and very into numbers. Now, of course, there can't be anybody can't do both. I've been there, right? But there's definitely people who don't speak as eloquently, but if they can get you those responses, then don't have
Yeah.
to talk to clients, right? But they should be fine.
So if that person is there, and whether they're just this golden retriever of an energy person or they're a freaking cyborg, like, you just always want to look at the answers that they're giving you. Like, are they technical? Do they make sense? Like, why would you choose that why would you choose that KPI? Read off some of these numbers. Here's an hypothetical. What do you feel like could be missing? So stuff like that is going to really help doctors figure out, like, all right, this is a good person to have in our on our team.
Yeah, because it does. Because of how much PHI is used within the revenue cycle as well, it gets hard to give them a real test case to say what are you going to do, and then creating fake test cases. Well, how much time do you have on your hands while you're looking to hire somebody? So I think that could work also to give like a case study, but you would have to come up with de-identified PHI to work a real live example.
What when you're if you were talk to a practice owner, what would and they ask you just point blank, I'm going to ask you, what are the top 3 either metrics or KPIs that I should be looking at every week as it relates to my billing? What would you tell them and why?
Okay, what is your billed versus your paid? Right. So I think if you have a certain amount that you expected to reimburse, what are you actually collected in that? I think the second thing off of that would be how does your build rate compare to your contract rate? So something that happens frequently is that rates change, whether it's the beginning of the new year or maybe a few months in, you've renegotiated. But if your billers don't know to bill at a better rate, you're going to end up still billing at the lower rate. And the way insurance companies work is if you ask me for less, I'm going to pay you less, even though we've agreed to pay you more, right? So, there's another piece right there. Those are definitely the top 2. Thinking about the third one, I would also look at maybe how much open revenue do you have that's past 120 days? Because most insurance companies, 180 is like the cutoff for the first bill out the door. So you'd want to make sure that at least 120 you're getting that done.
So we're looking at our good old AR there. What's typical? I know some people they might say. I mean, I've been in some organizations where the AR is just crazy. So you're saying 120, 90 to 120 is a good number to be at? What's typically causing them to spill past that point? If you're coming in and say, hey, we got stuff at 150, 180 days. What's typically going on there? They're like, all right, we need to fix this first to get you actually some more cash flow.
I mean, the stuff that's usually sitting out there are the ones that were not the easy fix, the ones that they do not know what to do, or is just a denial that somebody hadn't seen before. A lot of times that's usually relating to needing to submit additional paperwork or paperwork that might have been missing from the original case. So when your paperwork is missing, it definitely has people pushing it off to work anything else until they can get that paperwork complete.
Here's one that I've encountered. I'm just really kind of curious to know what you think. How often should you actually be looking at these metrics and the KPIs related to billing? Because I talk to some owners and it's like, let's do it daily, let's do it weekly. I'm like, that's not enough time. So what's a good cadence to actually sit down and have a constructive billing meeting where, all right, we're going over, we're seeing some trends, we can make some adjustments. What would you recommend?
So I think it really depends at what level, right? I think that the billers and their management team should be looking at daily trends, right? I think that maybe management reporting into a director should probably be on a monthly trend. And I think that with leadership or ownership, it's quarterly because you're not able to see that much movement. Even if you're, let's say, missed the first time, so you got a first denial, the time it takes to get the denial out and then the payer to respond, if you're even monthly is going to be too soon just based on the cutoffs of where that happens. I'd say quarterly is probably a good ownership overview where directors can look monthly and managers weekly or daily.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, I want to dive a little bit into your platform. Before we get there, I do want to bring up this aspect of maybe some cause for concern with some practices, which is especially if I outsource and I'm utilizing somebody else's tech. You mentioned like a third party, and now we have a lot of platforms obviously rolling in with AI, and there's obviously issues with governance, what have you. So, what are some things that, being that you're on that tech side that you're telepractice owner, these are the things you should maybe look out on the technology side just to be aware of and to maybe protect yourself.
Yeah, I think it's really important to do a security assessment. Obviously, the larger organizations do have a team in place that might be able to do security assessment. When you're a smaller practice, it's much harder to do. So I'd say that I know these are just going to sound like words that don't mean anything, but something to look out for somebody that just needs to check a box. I would look for something called high trust, HI trust. I would also look for SOC 2 type 2. I know that also sounds a little nuts, but those are things that if the vendor that you're using follows those things, then you can be sure that they are using secure methods for storing data. Um, Otherwise, doing an individual assessment obviously is always best, but knowing that they've gotten certain certificates that are recognized in the industry as being, HIPAA compliant as well as PHI ready for submission and storage of data, those are the two things I would definitely pay attention to.
Well, what are some other softwares or places of education that you recommend doctors that are going to be kind of moving into the space of taking more control of their RCM, taking more control of their billing? What are some uh like tech tech or literature or things that they should kind of brush up on before they start choosing what direction they want to go, whether it's building something in-house, a hybrid, or outsourcing?
So I'll tell you the truth, I haven't found anything that gets somebody that, which is why I built what I did. Um, to address exactly that, I don't think that there is a way to know which way you should go or which one might be better for you. And part of what the platform that I built is allow it to make that an easy decision on how you should go about your billing. Because it could be better for you to outsource it if you don't have the time to spend on anything else, or you're okay with the 90% reimbursement or 80% reimbursement that you'll end up with after you bring them in. um, there really isn't, that I've seen, literature that does a good comparison other than software that might be trying to sell you one way or the other. So there really is not a good place to go.
Is it because everyone's situation is so different? Like just every single, clinic they might have just like a very, different set of circumstances versus like maybe the intent or the agenda of the literature or the technology that's out there?
Yeah, I think it's the intent and the of the literature that's out there, right? Much of the stuff out there is a white paper written by a software company who's telling you that this is the way to go, or by a third party or a virtual assistant billing that's doing that. I haven't seen like an independently reviewed, document, talking about what is the best way for a practice to go, rather than having different companies trying to sell what they're selling to make that happen.
That's interesting. So it reminds me a lot of y- like there's HubSpot and like, Salesforce and like GHL and they do kind of a lot of, very, very similar things, but it's like, of course, they're going to tell you that we're the best. You need us. Like, what business doesn't need this particular one? Versus taking a step back and like, all right, let me just analyze my business and then reverse engineer the needs of my specific business of where it is today and then where I want it to go, and then find the stuff that's going to fit that thing. And I feel like that's a very logical thing to do. And but just no one really does that either.
Yeah, agreed. So either they're just slapping on whatever might have come with the EMR that they have, and they're dealing with it. Like I mentioned, that organization that's just on spreadsheets, they just do what they have to do to get that done. Some providers will take the time to figure that out to understand what the right path is, but most people either taking a recommendation from their colleagues or just paying a little additional to their EHR to keep that there, and it's not always doing the job.
Let's say you were talking to 100 doctors all across the United States, and they were kind of in that startup phase that you mentioned. You said like, hey, sometimes it's easier when you're in a startup phase versus you're 50 years in and you're going into a business that has all these systems and operations already in place, quote unquote. They're in place. Maybe they're not optimized, but let's focus on the startup size. And there are 100 people. What's kind of the biggest mental hurdle that they're facing or they're going through that if you were to talk to them, what would you say to them to kind of calm them down and feel more confident and empowered to attack their billing?
Yeah, I think if they had a good understanding of their contract, so they built their front end workflow, not necessarily system, because they might not all have systems, but if they built that front end workflow to match what their contracts are expecting of them, they could be on easy street, right? If they understood what those pairs would want from them and therefore built that front end process to collect it right the first time, they can at least know that 80% or 90% of their claims will go through before they need to worry about that. So I think really putting that process in place, even if they don't know what the process is going to look like specifically or how many people that might need to do that, if they understood the minimum requirements, then I think that they can put their mind at ease there.
What kind of differentiator would that mean to that business owner that does it? Like out of those 100, and if X amount of people actually did it, like they just did that workflow, just a simple workflow, not even integrating any type of software within it, but just understanding the beginning and the end, the beginning, middle, and end. What kind of differentiator would that make between themselves and other people, let's just say in their market? Is it a
Yeah,
significant differentiator, or what do you think?
100%. What I'd say is for those 100 people, if 75 of those did it, those would be the only ones in business the next year, right? I mean, you're really looking at those people that are not. The only way that they are going to stay in business is they're constantly getting funding, maybe, so it's hiding some of the problem. But really, year over year, you would be out of luck the next year if you don't set that up. So you're either going to pay really high in the front or high in the end.
So let me repeat what I think I heard. If you don't do this and you're starting up your practice, you will not be around next year. You're going to be taking on all that debt. You're going to have to go bankrupt. It's the humiliation and everything simply because you are not outlining what your workflow is on the front end. It like you do that one piece, it relieves you a lot on the back end of that billing cycle, and it's going to keep you in business for the long haul. That's what you
100%.
said.
And
Man,
yes, and
that's powerful.
yeah, yeah. And even if you wrote that down on paper, now I'm a technical guy talking about paper, but even if you had that process on paper, you would still do better than somebody who's not preparing in that way. Even if you knew how to write everything down on a paper, you would be better off than not looking at that.
Yeah, powerful. So when we're, I want to like dive into your platform, but I really want to kind of set the stage a little. We talked about, we get denials on insurance, and a lot of times, and you mentioned you shouldn't be surprised, but most often than not, clinics are surprised, right? I thought I did everything correctly. I thought I had all my information, documentation was great, and then they get denied, and it's either we don't have the time to fight it, or we just don't simply understand what we need to do to actually get paid on the service that we provided. I want to know, we talked about the EHR as well, utilizing your platform, which you're launching at this moment. I want you to maybe touch on that. Like, what was the inspiration? Because you're doing something a little bit different that is not a full, robust soup to nuts RCM. You're saying we're gonna do something a little different to attack this big, probably the biggest issue that we see with denials. So maybe you could just start introducing what's the platform there, what is it actually attacking and helping, how's it helping practices?
Sure. So it's called Healthcare Collect. And what it does is it doesn't care about the EMR that you use. What it'll do is after you've gone through all your scheduling, you did your service, and you got your first claim out the door, you'll send a copy of that claim to Healthcare Collect. Whether you do that through your clearinghouse, whether you do that through an API, or you can even attach it by email if you don't have any of that expertise. Once you bring in your claims into the system, you also can load your staff, whether you have 1, 10, or 20 staff. It'll automatically start breaking down all of your claims, and you can also upload your responses to then say, here's my aging of my open accounts. We then also have your staff in the in the system, so that we can now assign your staff systematically to accounts based on how old they are. They also, because they're going to be assigned to specific staff, you're not going to assign it to other staff, so you don't have duplicate work going on. And the coolest thing about this system too is it'll translate those denials to tell you what your next steps are to fix that denial. So now you could bring in entry level people to be able to just sit them in front, and it says literally take this, do that in the EMR to get that done.
So you're simplifying the process. I'm curious to know though what made you decide to attack? And I'll say just because it's a terrible word, but saying just the denial aspect. What are you saying to make you go into that versus again like just build out? Hey, I got something for it that handles everything versus like let's just tackle this one major issue.
So a few reasons. I mean, the first one is like I don't want to look to replace somebody's EMR. That can be a big disruption, right? You're gonna have a lot of records you're gonna have to move over, and there's just a lot that's having to do with that. And taking that on is such a big bite just to fix your RCM. So I'm not looking to replace an EMR or EHR. I think also a lot of the other platforms that might do some RCM also do a million other things, and I'm not looking to have you have to buy something with like bloatware just to get one function that you need done. So if you need to be able to, in a relatively inexpensive way, track your claims that go out the door, track how you get them back in, instructions on how to get that done, track the productivity of your RCM in-house team, whether it's 1 or 12 or 15 people, I don't need to replace all those other systems. In fact, it should work alongside that. So it's not a big decision to make. It's an add-on to what you already do without replacing what you already do to help you get that reimbursement.
So I feel like this conversation was and I'm glad that it was very technically heavy. And but I want to allow you to have a moment to talk about the benefits of the benefits. And what I mean by that is, there are a lot of doctors that are struggling with this particular area. A lot of hospitals that are struggling with this particular area of just billing, dealing with insurance, getting things right, systems. Is that if if those things were better and improved, and they follow a system, or they work with you, what does that do to their community? What does that do to the mentality and the mindset of and the mental health care of the executives, the people that are running it? Like, what does that do of just getting this shit handled? What does that actually do to communities?
So first of all, it gives the visibility to leadership. So where they might always be on your back if you're not in leadership, trying to understand, well, where are we at and how much have we collected and what's outstanding and what's the latest and did you talk to that payer? This gives management and ownership visibility so they don't need to come to you, A. But from the ownership side, I now don't need to track it down by 20 different people to find out what's going on. There's a very easy, ready to use, variable with reporting or just live look at a dashboard to see the health and visibility between when you finished your service to whether you got paid for that service. So it gives that ease of mind to say we're either on it or we're about to be on it because somebody's taking care of it and it's going to be handled until it's complete.
Because when you were saying earlier, like, all right, if 75 of those 100, doctors did this, they're actually going to be alive next year and probably, thriving in their business just because they got those things in place. Well, that's a pretty big difference of like either you're dead or you're not. Like either you're, going through or you're not. And to me, that's like surviving or thriving, you know.
Yeah.
And so kind of talk a little bit about that, because I feel like sometimes people tend to push this off, kind of what you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, like we just need new negotiators and on these contract terms, and you're saying no, we need to look within and handle what we got first.
Yeah. I mean, if you don't get the system right, you'll never get that done. You never fix that. It's just going to be a larger and larger hole. So I think, back to being able to predict what your office is going to do in a year by being able to more closely align to the numbers that you're predicting because your reimbursement terms when you start, you're then able to collect on what you've predicted for that. So I think that predictability that happens or the visibility that happens in the interim will really allow you to thrive. The other thing that could happen using a system like this, where we talked about root cause analysis. Well, if I'm tracking all those denials for you and giving you those instructions, now we are automatically coming to what are your top 5 denials? What are you specifically in your practice struggling with that we can help you specifically and consult with you in order to avoid those denials from happening to start with. So by starting to do that, I don't know if doctors are aware. Um, when you get your reimbursement back from a payer, it all comes in one big packet, right? So you have your denials, you have your payments, you have your list and pay, you have your partial clawbacks, partial reimbursement. I mean, it all comes together. So somebody's spending that time either outsourcing or insourcing to sort through that. You load this to the system. This system will do all that for you. It'll knock off the paid ones, leave you out the open ones, and give you that visibility and stable mind about where you're going next.
Man, all right. Who knew there was so much to just RCM and medical billing? Huh? I mean, clearly you did, but other people are like, damn, I don't know if that intense. But this is, again, I just want people who are listening to really understand this is such a crucial aspect that, and I know we mentioned at the beginning, it's such a big part of your business that gets overlooked. Yeah, I was kind of said talking about life. It's like people who don't look at their finances. Like, I don't know how do you run your life the most efficient way. And it's the same thing in medical practices. If you're not really dialed in on the processes for your RCM/medical billing, you're losing money somewhere along the line. So I wanted you guys to understand that this is a crucial component. We actually at the beginning before we kind of got on like website, we're gonna put that into the show link. You said that's good to go. I'll have people they can connect with you on LinkedIn. Anywhere else, anybody can connect with you if they say, "Hey, this platform seems super interesting. I'd love to maybe start getting some information on it."
Not right now. It's the website or LinkedIn.
Okay.
That's it.
Perfect. All right. Well, I'm going to show the script for you guys. Moshe, it was a pleasure, man. Really glad you made it on today. And
Learned a lot.
yeah.
Yeah, man. Thank you. Good stuff.
Thanks for having me.
All right, guys. Take care. We'll catch you next time.
Yep.